beings, that is, they were begotten of them, just like the still existing Earth races. The celestial sons or star travelers, as we will call our ancestors, were native to various planets of stars, in another space-time configuration or far away from the Solar System, where the planets were fundamentally different climatically. Consequently, they also produced other races that were able to adapt themselves to the climate from the very beginning. Those who were climatically conditioned also developed suitable skin colors, of whom there are countless ones in the universe. The heights of their bodies were also different because, depending on the gravity of the respective planet, they ranged from only 50 centimeters tall up to several meters. There were and even are beings that you call giants, colossi, or titans, and such beings also once animated the earth. They also witnessed descendants here, but they were gradually wiped out because they were usually very malicious and exercised tyranny. The different color races of today are, thus, descendants of our variously colored ancestors, who came from different planets of foreign stars. Billy says then the current people of the Earth actually weren't solely created on Earth, and they also aren't descended from apes. Semyaza says, do you believe, then, in this ape-human theory? Billy says, I'm not stupid. My intellect tells me something different from the crazy brain of Darwin, who set this shower story in the world and fraudulently substantiated it with distorted ape bones, which has been concealed and kept secret by the responsible persons up to this day. Translator's note including Wendell Stevens, it seems, who omitted the entire section after the word Darwin in Message from the Pleiades Volume 1. Semyaza says, I didn't regard you as stupid. Billy says, I didn't mean that in such a way, it's just a figure of speech to explain what I feel. Semyaza says, oh, I see. Well, you right with your view that the people of the earth are not descendants of the apes. They were partially begotten by our ancestors, who also mixed themselves with earth beings, who were simply called Evers at that time. A designation that means nothing other than, Billy says, the bearing one or bearer. Semyaza says, sure, but once again, you beat me to it. How do you know that? Billy says, I also have my head for thinking and for combining, but on the other hand, I also know the Talmud Emanuel somewhat more than just that which still exists in the German language. Semyaza says, of course. But the earth beings at that time were of the most diverse forms and kinds. In part, they were completely wild creatures of human-like forms, which had been partly exposed to earlier millennia on Earth by our ancestors, that is, their descendants. These descendants of the outcasts were abused by foreign space travelers, and these also mated through genetic manipulation with different animal species and witnessed genetically new life forms. One of these, by the way, is the ape being that is still known today, which represents a human-animal mutation, namely the Panpaniscus bonobo equals dwarf chimpanzee. Thus, the ape being is descended from the human being, not vice versa. Other ape beings resulted from natural evolution in the hominid line. Your researchers and scientists have already found many intermediate mutations between human beings and ape beings, but usually only as skeletons or partial skeletons. These intermediate mutations, part human being, part ape being, are known to the people under names such as Africanus, Peking man, and Neanderthal, etc. 4 different kinds of these have survived over all past millennia, and their descendants still live today. But to be sure, no longer in large hordes but rather only in isolated or very small groups. They are so wild and shy that they will hardly ever see humans. Humans have given them special names, Yeti, etc. The Evers, along with Earth-created hominid creatures, were nothing more than very wild descendants of those who were outcast thousands of years ago, from whom, at that time, any aid was withdrawn. They were like wild animals that lived in large hordes. When our ancestors finally established themselves on Earth, they broke a strict law and used force on these beings. That is, that in spite of their wildness, they somehow cast the beautiful female beings under their spell and mated with them. This led to the first higher developed ancestors of today's human beings. In the old ancestral language, they were called Adam, meaning earth human being. At first, this designation remained as a name, and this is still used by you today. Because our ancestors were mixed races of various colors and sizes, however, they naturally also witnessed, completely according to their characteristics, different colors and races of different sizes. The smallest ones were 50 centimeters high, while the largest and most vicious ones reached to 12 meters. Their appearance was also different, and many kinds of them were only remotely reminiscent to human forms. One let them die out or killed them when they became too vicious. They often hid themselves in far remote areas and survived for thousands of years, since their average age was about 1,500 years. But gradually, they also became victims of the time or of the people. The last of the vicious ones, whose life was ended by force, died a little more than 230,000 years ago. Today, to our knowledge, only 7 such beings of the old human life forms live on the earth, where they remain so well hidden that they will never be found with certainty and will one day die a peaceful death, and indeed, without descendants, for they have become too old and passive for propagation. More often than these giants, titans, and cyclopes, as you call them, were the simple tall men. They often served great and power-hungry rulers. They were called Goliaths and were especially used for purposes of war. Translator's note: for those who own message from the Pleiades Volume 1, note that the figures found in my translation match the ones in the most updated German version of this contact report. The figures found in message from the Pleiades Volume 1 are, therefore, inaccurate. Billy says thanks, that was very detailed, Semi-Aza. But now, I still have a question about the future. Can you tell me some things about the future, which lay ahead for the people and the earth? Semi-Aza says, now you really bring me into a quandary. For many things, it is good for one to know them in advance, but for many other things, it is advisable not to know them, if one doesn't know exactly that he can confront the knowledge properly. I can very well entrust you with what the future brings for you, but for other people, that is, without a doubt, a dangerous imposition. Billy says, I wouldn't like to know every detail, just a few things from a general point of view. Semi-Aza says, nevertheless, I must think about this first and also consult the others. Billy says, of course, Semi-Aza, I don't want to tempt you into something that wouldn't be right for you. Semi-Aza says that wouldn't be so easy, but still, I thank you. We have found just the right person in you, and I am very happy about that. You belong to a group of people who deal with border sciences and spiritual sciences. I have often striven around the interests of this group and have found that it is the only one in this form. You work on a very realistic basis and unconventionally. I have assessed that other groups of the same kind deal, unfortunately, with things that have fallen to the unreal. They often carry out experiments that they themselves can't even understand and for which they usually search for false explanations. But this isn't further surprising because in these groups, there are virtually only people who have succumbed to a delusional faith and to the erroneous teachings of the religions. I congratulate your group, which approaches every subject so unconventionally and realistically, not in a mystical form, as others do. You are on the right track and keep it in such a way. Billy says thanks, Semi-Aza. May I still ask you another question, or was that your farewell speech for today? Semi-Aza says you amuse me with your peculiar sense of humor. Just ask further, because I still have some time. Billy says you've mentioned our group just now, exactly from there comes my next question. Just as it did before, how does it behave with the spirit world and with the so-called tape recorder voices? Can you give me exhaustive information about this? Semi-Aza says not in such a way as you would like, nevertheless, I can tell you a few things that you can retransmit. There are, unfortunately, very many things that a human being may first experience once he has become